Okay, today we have a 2009 Chevy Malibu. At least I think it's a 9, but I think 2004 to 12 are all the same. Where's the year on this damn thing? Not used to GM. Anyway, I'm 99% sure it's a 2009. Anyway, front coil spring. When you turn the wheel, you could hear a gung 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 gung, like a loud springy sound coming from the top of the spring perch up here. It's only got like 130,000 kilometers on it, which is like 80,000 miles. But anyway, the spring is gone, so I'm just going to be replacing it as a fast fit strut, which comes with spring, the spring mount, the little mount up here. It's basically just going to be taking these nuts off and then bolting the strut from the spindle down at the bottom. So first I'm going to get this up on jack stands and get the wheel off and be back. It's starting to rain. Lovely. So I'm going to be stopping any second now. These are 19 millimeter plastic socket. They look like lug nuts, but they're not. So they're 19 millimeter and they hold the wheel cover on. And then underneath, I think those are 19s as well. Yes, they are. So underneath the 19 millimeter wheel lug nuts, and these plastic ones just merely bolted onto the lug nut and hold it, the wheel cover in place. See the threads there? So that's what they screw onto. And it looks like I have to stop for a few minutes because it's starting to rain. It's often going to be soaking down the sway bar end link, where this is bolted on the end link for the sway bar that goes down to the sway bar down there. And then the bolts that hold the strut in place, the pinch bolts, and this one here holds the brake line. Oh no! Am I running out? Hopefully not. Nope. It's just not coming out as hard. Using Seafoam Deep Creep, which is the best stuff for loosening rusted bolts and things. So, well, it's starting to rain now. I'm gonna let this soak probably for about an hour while it's raining. And I think that's the only 4 bolts I have to take off. 1, 2, that should be it, other than the 3 upper strut mounts up under the hood, but they should be no issue whatsoever. I don't believe that's a 4th, I believe that's just a ground. I believe it's just these 3. Anyway, I'll be back once the rain stops. Okay, in between blasts of rain, 10 millimeter bolt, and this is for the little mount here, the little arm that holds the brake hose on. Oh, that's not tight. Not that I'm complaining. Loose bolts are always good. Now does that just, as far as I know, that pops out of there. I believe, there's no other way that mounts on there. I might have to tap this arm off. You can see here there's a little slot where the bolt goes through and then grabs on in the back, and then it's bolted to that. So there's nothing else holding that on that I can see. So I'll be back in 1 second. Put that 10 mil bolt. Let's see if I get a wider shot of this, sorry. I put it back on a few threads and I'm gonna tap it gently with a hammer because there's no other way that's mounted. You can see the little grooves in the end of the bolt, the little lines. So that means it's pushing through and holding to something. And yeah, that looks like. So tapping that in, oh, now it zoomed in. Tapping that in, and that's gonna give it enough room once that bolt goes back far enough. This will slide out that slot there. It'll slide this way toward you, and the rain's coming back in a few minutes. It should be, is it perfectly round? It's perfectly round. So on the new one, this will just slide back into that slot and then you'll tighten it back up again. I think there's one on the other side, but I don't see it for this, for the brake wheel speed sensor. Anyway, sorry, raining. Back in a bit. Okay, well, the sun is quickly poking through the rain. We have to remove these two. You know what? First I'm going to remove the sway bar bolt. That looks like a 17 or a 19, so I'm going to undo that. Okay, another break in the rain. Let's take the sway bar end link off. This is an 18 millimeter nut right there, and then there is an 8 millimeter. The shaft is an 8 millimeter. So you're going to use a socket or a wrench on the 8 mil. Use a 6-sided because, you know, the multiple 12-sided or whatever, they're just going to, something old and a little rusty. It's not going to put much torque on it. And these two, oops, don't know if you can see now. Let's move you down. Come on, come on. These two pinch bolts that hold the strut in. Turn that wheel a little bit. Those are both 18s. Well, this is going to take a little persuasion. I'm going to have to get a cheater bar on this. This is, what's the backside nut? Oh, the backside nut doesn't appear to be a nut. The back of the bolt is just like it's round with two flattened sides. So it might just take the open end of a wrench. So anyway, I'm going to get an extension. We'll be back in 1 second. Okay, I don't know that the back needs to be held. I'm doubting it does because they're not just going to, it looks like it was a 14 or a 15 if you did have to hold the two flat sides. I don't think you do. 18 millimeter socket. I'm just going to cheat because I'm trying to deke rain. Rusty. And the bottom one. These two bolts are going to have to be tapped out, I would assume. And this is the mount for the ABS sensor right there, the wheel speed sensor. It just mounts on there. I assumed it would have mounted into this little hole here. Guessing it doesn't. Wonder why it's put on that side. I guess they just use this exact same strut for the left and right side and then weld on the mount for the sway bar end link on the opposite side, and this is the exact same one for both sides, and then of course spin the, yeah, that's probably what it is. Anyway, I have to tap these out. I'm gonna have to get a hammer and tap these bolts out. It appears to be the only way to get them out. I'm not a a GM expert by any means, but that's the only thing that makes sense. So anytime you tap on a bolt, well, if you're just tapping, you can tap on it. But if you're going to be hitting it with any force, put the nut back on so you don't destroy the threads. Anyway, I'm going to go grab a hammer and we'll tap that out. Okay, so I've moved the nuts so that they're protecting the threads, but the threads aren't out past the nut. You don't want to mushroom them in place. And then we're just going to tap. The bolt most of the way through. Oh, that's kind of awkward. Once you're just giving it light taps, you can have the bolt off. You don't need to protect the thread from light taps. It's the heavy ones that you want to protect it from. Sorry, try not to get in your way. I grease those before I put them back in. Come on off of there. Just the weight of the suspension holding this bolt in now. There we go. Okay, everything's detached. See that nastiness? Bimetallic corrosion. That's from the aluminum where it meets the steel. And it creates this. See this powdery stuff? It's like a corrosion between the aluminum, when the aluminum and steel react together. Just chipping it out to look at it. We don't need to see this. So now we're going to go up on top and take out, I believe those are 10mm or 8mm bolts. These three here. 1, 2, 3. And back in a sec. I believe they're 10s. Now what I'm going to do to keep this whole thing from falling, I'm going to put one of the bolts back in the lower strut so it doesn't fall out of me. I'm just going to pull this back up or put it down here. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to hold this from falling down once I loosen those 3 bolts back. Actually, I'm not going to do that because the corrosion is just a bitch to get that in there. So I'm not going to worry. I can just reach around with my hand as I'm loosening the 3 bolts. It's close enough. I can reach under with this hand and hold it in place back. Okay, so I'm just going to loosen all 3 bolts, and I'm holding with the other hand, holding the strut so it doesn't fall. And one old strut. One new strut. So like I said, these seem to be the same side to side, and this seems to be the difference here, that they've just welded that on, and they probably weld the hat for the spring on in the opposite direction. They might not even change that, but that's, who cares? Anyway, we're going to reverse the procedure. Putting the top in full first, lightly tighten the bolts. These are, oh, it did come with new bolts, neat. Anyway, back. So I don't know if you can tell by looking at the strut, but the 3 bolts are different spaces apart. These 2 are slightly closer than these 2 are to each other, or these 2 are to each other. These 2 are closer. So that makes you align them only one way in the car. And if you look up underneath, let's put this aside. You can see the rusty spot where it was, and right here, oops, there's a flat section of the circle that matches up with that one, so you know exactly which way to put it in. So I'm just going to place this up in and loosely tighten the bolts to hold in place, and we'll be back in a minute. Oh, it appears my work light was strobing and making the screen fuzzy. I don't know. Anyway, turn this strut. Now lift the spindle back up into place. Does that bottom one line This is one of the reasons you leave those top bolts loose, so the sucker wiggles around a bit. Come on. Isn't this being fun? Anyway, I'm going to try and get the bottom bolt in first and then rock it up into place. So you probably don't want to watch me struggle with it. It might take me 2 or 3 more minutes, and I'll be back in a second. That's if you can even see it from there. Can you see down there? I guess you can. Anyway, be back in a second. Okay, so the bottom bolt's in. Takes a little bit of wrestling, but it's not that big a deal. And now tapping the top one. And we can line that up with a screwdriver. And where's the other bolt? I put a bit of anti-seize on them. You going in, you're not lining up. That aluminum really swells. That's just the brake shield rattling, if anyone is asking. So I'm just going to line up this bolt and get it in. It's going to take a few minutes to make sure it's in, and again, you don't want to watch me go through all this. Upper and lower bolts are in. It's just into the first set of, there was 2 sets of splines. As long as the first set is in there, this is going to hold, and you're not going to have to worry about tapping the bolt all the way. And you can if you want, it's not going to hurt anything. But no sense killing your eardrums pounding forever. So I'm just going to put these 2 bolts back on. And I've got to get the torque specs, so I will be back. Bolts, nuts back on. And someone's going to say it, you know it. And I'll get the torque specs, and I can also pull the sway bar end link. I have to get the torque spec for that as well. The one I don't have to get it for is for that little 10mm bolt that holds this bracket in the front, because that torque is basically not very much. So let me get the torque specs and be back in a minute. Okay, closest I could find to torque specs are 25 for the upper sway bar end link, about 80 for the 2 lower bolts, and well, that one doesn't really matter. That's going to be like 10 foot-pounds. You're just going to tighten it till it doesn't move anymore. And the tops are about 18. And you don't do the tops until you put the wheel back down and put all the weight on the car. Don't use those little bolts to yank the strut up. So once these are in, everything's tightened up, put the wheel back on, lower the car. Obviously take the jack stands out and tighten the 3 at the top last. So yeah, don't forget to put your brake bracket on. Again, these are 80s, and just gonna tighten them up. And then tighten them to 80 with the torque wrench once. At about 70 foot-pounds right now, and then this one I'm just going to have to do again. I'm going to have to do that by feel, because I don't have a torque wrench that's going to allow me to tighten the nut while I'm holding the bolt on the outside. Anyway, just tighten this 10mm up, and I'll be back in a minute. We'll do the top. Okay, so everything's tightened up. You're just going to check and make sure nothing's kinked, no hoses are kinked, everything's back where it's supposed to belong. I've put everything on, nothing is loose, and it looks like we are all good to go. So time to put the wheel on and go back up top. Okay, so now the weight is on the car again, wheel's back on, and it's on the ground. I'm going to tighten these 3 top bolts, nuts, to 18 foot-pounds. And If your torque wrench measures in inch-pounds, just multiply by 12. 18 times 12 is 180, 2 times 8 is 16, 196 inch-pounds. So tighten all three, then go back and do them over again, just to make sure. And remember, torque specs on bolts are generally, the bigger the bolt, the more the torque it can take, obviously. So nothing small is ever going to be, like this could never be a 30 or 40 foot-pound torque bolt. It just would shear, it would just break. But I am going to move that up 1 pound to 19, because that doesn't feel quite tight enough. And 19 is about as tight as you put a spark plug in, a little less than a spark plug. And good to go. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, hit the little notification bell, and you'll get first crack at all the videos. Well, everybody does. I don't hold back on anybody. Anyway, thanks for watching.